Penn State football has a new offensive coordinator, something that if you are BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, you knew was coming. You knew the name, and Fitz, as somebody who was getting that information and telling people about it, tell people about it. Who is Penn State's new offensive coordinator?
Oh, you're setting me up here to stumble, but no, Kansas offensive coordinator Andy Koltinicki is expected to be named Penn State's next offensive coordinator, taking over from Mike Yurcich. This is one that is in the expected phase now. Penn State's still got some things to finalize, but this is the guy that they've zeroed in on. This is the guy that Nate Bauer posted a week from today, actually, that was the main player in this offensive coordinator search. So Penn State going big. I mean, this is a guy that is incredibly well respected. The immediate reaction from the national folks has been this is a guy that can coach. So I'm excited to see what he can bring to the table. There's a lot to like. There's a lot to, it sort of bucks the trend of where he's been going with his career with Lance Leipold, who is a coach who I've been a huge fan of for a long, long time. Going back to his time at Buffalo. And of course, he was very successful at Wisconsin Whitewater before that. But Koltinicki's been there every step of the way. Kansas football has developed into one of the more exciting offenses in the Big 12. And James Franklin will try and cash in on that and bring that style to the Big 10.
So what do you think of the offense? Penn State played Buffalo previously. I know that you've been watching some of the Kansas offense. What were your thoughts on what he was able to do this year and generally his Koltinicki's style of coordinating?
It's not so much the style and scheme as it is his ability to be flexible with what he has. He played 3 quarterbacks this year. Of course, Jalen Daniels is the guy that everybody knows, but Daniels was in and out of the lineup this season for multiple reasons. So they had to do it without him, and they did it without him. He scored, I think, 34 points a game, number 4 in the Big 12. They did it in impressive fashion at times. I know you and I both watched that Illinois game because Kansas played Illinois the week before Penn State. Kansas looked a hell of a lot better than Penn State did against that Illinois defense, which was a fairly good defense, defensive player of the year, of course, in the Big 12. But I think what he specializes in is exploiting matchups and, getting the guys that, can hurt you or that can hurt the defense the most in the right spots. And really, from what we watched the last couple of years, it's happened some. It hasn't happened a ton. Mike Yurcich has had a similar reputation in the past, but Koltinicki seems to, at every stop of the way, whether it's a drop back passer, whether it's a guy that can make plays and improvise as a quarterback, he has adjusted his system to the personnel that he had. And we said coming into the offensive coordinator search that's really what you need to find, because I don't think it's a cookie cutter league. I don't think it's a certain offense that somebody wants to run. I think you've got framework, of course, but at the same time, when you can maximize your players' abilities, that's the main goal of college football coaching and being an offensive coordinator in major college football. And that's this guy's reputation.
Yeah, some of the digging I was doing and some of the stuff that, if you want, by the way, you want people who are in the know and are good internet sleuths, check out BlueWhiteIllustrated.com on the message board. People putting up a lot of good information when we started talking about this potentiality happening, and some of the coaching that he was doing. I watched some videos on how he prepares his game plan. You could not have. I know that this question is here in the chat from Jack. Says another offensive coordinator from a conference that doesn't play defense. And if you watch, this is what I started with initially. Was I don't know about this passing game. This looks a lot like what I saw from Mike Yurcich when he was hired at Penn State, and that explosiveness I thought was what James Franklin wanted. If you look a little further, you'll see Koltinicki is not a Big 12 coordinator, as Fitz said. At different stops along the way, the offense has looked different. It's about putting guys in position to succeed. What do you have? And creating a game plan. And some of the details and some of the things I learned about him earlier this week, mostly centered around how to coach and how, some of the things he was saying was a much more collaborative. The things that we have talked about, that Nate has highlighted about James Franklin, what he was hoping for in an offensive coordinator and what he liked about the guys that he had recently, it feels like this checks all the boxes from a procedural standpoint, from a coaching standpoint. What else have you learned about this dynamic of Koltinicki and his rise? This is another coach that I think there's a positive aspect out there, and this is one of the top candidates, because I think that there's going to be a question about that of where was he on the pecking order of what Penn State wanted and what they got.
Well, if you look at Lance Leipold, Lance has been tremendously successful basically everywhere that he's been. Did an amazing job at Buffalo, of course, got that job at Kansas. Lance is a CEO. He lets his guys do their thing. And the question that I think a lot of people had, and it's a rightful question, is this Koltinicki's offense? Is this Lance Leipold's offense? But when you're together that long, like, you're going to have, of course, elements that bleed into everything, but you have to evolve. And the offensive coordinator is the guy that makes that evolution. And Koltinicki's been able to do that in the Big 12. I mean, going from Buffalo to the Big 12, night and day, obviously.
Yeah.
You have an opportunity to grow. You have an opportunity to learn a little bit. And yes, if you're going to have concerns about coming from the Big 12, I get it. Penn State just made a hire from the Big 12 and ended up not working out. So, like, there are those concerns, absolutely. But this guy has been able to adapt. This guy is not a guy that you look at and say, this is where his shortcoming is, and it's an obvious shortcoming. We talked about when Mike Yurcich was hired about using actually the run game in general, and then ends as well. You don't really see that because of the way that he's been able to change and adapt. They had 5 players catch over 20 balls this year, so spread it around. Sometimes you'll have guys that are catching a lot of passes, and it's more concentrated toward those playmakers. The other thing is, at Kansas, he didn't have those guys. He didn't have a ton of weapons. Now Penn State has to retool that outside receiver room and figure out what they've got. But at the same time, you have a guy that has made a lot out of nothing, and that's not an offensive style. That's not a scheme. That's not something.
Yes.
But it is. There's something to be said about that style from a college football coordinator.
Yeah, creativity, I think, is something that is a hallmark of his game as well. Watching some of going back to that Illinois game we talked about, obvious mismatch with Jer'Zhan Newton in the middle. The way that they attacked was both, I think, correct, and the way they did it was multiple, so it wasn't just the same 1 or 2 concepts.
What was that word? What was that word you just used?
Concepts?
No, before that. It was
Creative?
multiple, which you're going to hear
go.
a lot about being multiple. It was the first thing. So Greg Pickle wrote his get to know Andy Koltinicki, and the first thing was get ready to hear about this offense being multiple. You're going to hear a lot of that, and that's something that I think that you kind of have to do when you're outmanned, like he was, like you are at Buffalo. When you're going to play some really good teams, played Penn State really well.
Yep.
When he was at Buffalo, and when Lance Leipold was at Buffalo. And you go to Kansas, and all of a sudden you're at the bottom of the pool in terms of talent. You have to make yourself flexible. You have to make yourself multiple in order to be a threat. And they did so pretty quickly. Like, that's very surprising it would be like Penn State basketball just all of a sudden going in, and sorry for the Penn State basketball fans, but just all of a sudden going in and just lighting things up and being crazy. So I think it's a very promising hire from that standpoint. Again, I'm not going to sit here and tell you he's going to be a great offensive coordinator, but the things that he's done so far, his resume is pretty impressive.
Yeah, and the different styles in which he's done it. I'm just going to highlight that again, going from a mobile quarterback to a guy that was more of a pocket passer, but also having, it seems like, offenses that are executing at a high level. Everybody's on the same page, and that was one of the things I learned about this week, trying to dig into him, is he's a guy that wants input. He's a guy that wants all the voices heard, so that all the best ideas bubble to the top, but also everyone's on the same page in terms of how are we blocking this, how are we attacking this particular front. So that has been impressive. You look at his, looking at his teams, I'd say for the most part they are technically good, and that's, that starts from the top. So something else to look at, and something else I'm going to be digging into during his coordinator career. I guess the last thing, and there's some questions in the chat. This is the opposite of multiple is complex. So Michael's back. He says, any concerns that complexity, one of Mike Yurcich's downfalls with his previous team? Is that something that you would be looking out for in the future?
Yeah, you were about to say concern, and I was about to shut that down. But yeah. I mean, you look out for it because it's another new offense. It's another situation where you have to, get your guys on the same page, and you've been doing the same thing for a long time. So I think it's more with that than it is with actually teaching. You get a chance to install it. I mean, going back to 2020, Kirk Ciarrocca did not have a chance to put the offense in because, everything that was happening at that point, and came back, and they didn't really have an offense in 2020. They switched it to Mike Yurcich. Looked pretty good with a veteran quarterback in 2021, but of course we saw in 2022, and you see the shortcomings that came this year, especially in the big games. So yeah, I don't think it's apples to apples comparison there. But yeah, it's going to be something that really you got to find your best players, put them in the best position possible, and that's the goal for everyone. Let's not act like Mike Yurcich didn't try to do that at times, but like I think this is a guy that's been flexible in an area where he didn't always necessarily have the top talent. Yurcich, of course, came from Ohio State, came from Texas. Pretty talented guys to run out there. So it'll be interesting to see how flexible and how compatible he is with the rest of the staff.
Jason Nallman always here to provide a thumbs up. If you're enjoying the video, you like learning about Andy Koltinicki, the new offensive coordinator, please like the video. And again, I'm just going to stress this. We've been doing a little bit of homework because the guys on the staff got the information. The insiders were the insiders, and they got the information for those people over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Great time to sign up for the YouTube crowd. You get a special deal, $1 for 2 months. You're here. You like Penn State football. You're probably here for the recruiting show earlier this morning. Use code PSU1 to get a special offer for 2 months, which takes you through all of this stuff and into the bowl game, etc., and beyond, just for $1, so you can try it out. You can get all that juicy information. But the bowl game, obviously important to James Franklin. The transfer portal coming up. This had to get buttoned up pretty soon with all those big things on the horizon. So how quickly do guys in this situation, do their feet hit the ground? And I guess what's the next step here?
Well, I mean, December 4th is the next step for the transfer portal opening for non-graduate transfers, guys that haven't gone through coaching changes. So you want to hit the ground running. You got to get it. I know coaches are going to be out this weekend in terms of recruiting, but you got to get everybody on the same page, figure out what your plan of attack is going to be. Penn State did offer Macklin from North Texas as the receiver. He's just spaced on his first name because I wanted to call him Jeremy, but that is his cousin.
Okay.
But no, it's a situation where you've got to like line things up and be ready to attack it on Monday. The interesting thing, there was a couple questions here in the chat about recruiting, and that's more of a position coach thing. You're going to find what he wants in terms of his framework and his athletes, but like the offensive coordinator rarely is going to go, "This is the guy I want. This is the guy. This is the guy," and now I have to go get them. As I mentioned earlier in the recruiting show, it's more of an icing situation on top where he, brings the guys in, show them how they fit and everything like that, where the legwork is done by guys under him. So I think that'll be a little different. It'll be interesting to see his quarterback evaluation. We talked about that on the show a little bit earlier. Penn State has Beckham Kritza in the class of 2025. We'll see what, I think anybody can really make it work with Ethan Grunkmeyer in the class of 2024. So I don't really see much changing from that aspect, but Penn State's got a pretty good recruiting staff, especially in the offensive side of the ball. So we're going to see what they can do. And a lot of that's going to come down to what they can do. Surprise, surprise, at wide receiver, whether that's on the current roster, whether that's in the transfer portal in this cycle, or whether that's in the 2024 and 2025 classes. He, of course, is going to be familiar with guys that he has recruited. He's going to be familiar with guys that he's been around, watched him at camp and things like that. So he's going to bring his own evaluations. Whether that meshes with what Penn State is trying to do as a whole, you're not sure. But as the offensive coordinator, and I assume he's getting a pretty good chunk of change to come here, he's going to have, an expensive opinion, a weighted opinion, if you will. Right. So we will see what happens with that. Beyond that, not a ton. We talked about Lincoln Cure, the tight end from Kansas, earlier on the show, in the recruiting show. Just an interesting overlap. I don't think there's really anything more than coincidence there, but he's a guy that's very interested in Penn State after visiting this fall.
Yeah, obviously, any connections he has to receivers will be heard, and it'll be something that I think is a positive sign. Is there something coming from a different recruiting territory that gives you mentioned it's icing on the cake, but just generally connections and things like that. Is there something you can get a little bit of a boost? I know Penn State in the 2024 class is pretty secure, and it's about the portal, but is there anything that you've seen just historically when guys bring in their own connections, especially if they're not in the same recruiting region, that can be a bit of a bump or help?
It's possible. You remember 2 cycles ago, Stacy Collins came in, and all of a sudden Venga Iwane was a guy that, Penn State was in the mix for. So you've got these connections, guys that have seen it, and guys that have connected with that coach via the player, via his high school coach, his trainer, or something like that. So he's going to bring his own connections with him. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I know, who he was targeting heavily and who could actually make a jump or anything like that. But, this is a guy that called the offense. This is a guy that maybe some people were going to play in his offense for. So, you always have that possibility.
The last question I have, and this is obviously James Franklin just hired him. So they're a fit because this is the fit that James Franklin has chosen. we rewind the clock. Mike Yurcich this is the guy James Franklin wanted to hire. Explosive plays, getting plays. I know that the chat is littered with Big 12 doesn't play defense. And, if you're joining late, we talked about what Andy Koltinicki has done at multiple stops of not just being a Big 12 coordinator. So go check that part out, and we'll have stuff over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com to kind of give you a little bit more depth than that. But generally, what's your opinion of how this fit is for Penn State and James Franklin with Andy Koltinicki based on what you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's points there. I mean, so that's number one. That's the thing that they're looking for. There's experience there. That's a guy that's called plays at multiple times, and he's coached for a coach that I think James Franklin wants to be in terms of being a CEO and sort of being the head coach of the offense and, letting the guy do it on defense. So, I think it checks a lot of the boxes there, in terms of yeah, you're going to have questions about the Big 12. I think everybody's going to, but he's done it at multiple stops that have not been in the Big 12 as well. So I think you're looking at a guy that's made the most out of what he's had to work with. And now all of a sudden he's got a new logo to recruit with. He's got a new batch of players to work with, a new running game that he can maximize, I think, and maybe be a little bit more consistent in the running game. You and I were talking before we went on film, or before we went on live here. And you look at the Illinois game, you look at some of the things that he's done in the past, and they've run the football effectively. And it's not just one, it is not just you can put games up against Buffalo games and Kansas games. You can put them up against each other, and it doesn't necessarily look like the same offense. And to me, that's a good thing, because you've got framework of what you like to work with. But at the same time, if you're different on tape for us, you're different on tape for Ohio State, Michigan. So, I mean, that is an opportunity for them to sort of be a little bit more multiple, as we said a little bit earlier, and make the most of it.
One thing that I've noticed, and this is the last thing I'll say, is I think he does do a good job of using space. And that's something that James Franklin has talked about: defend the whole field, use space, and not to compare directly, because this is what always happens, right? Is X or Y, and Mike Yurcich was fired, Andy Koltinicki is hired. Mike Yurcich was very much, it seemed to me, a classic, these are the systems we want to run. We want this system to be, everything plays off the same thing, inside, outside, and playing play action off of that. Andy, from what I've seen of his offenses, does similar things, but also is creative in the way that, pitching the ball to the outside, which is something that I heard about all year long, and is correct, but also they didn't do, some of the ways of getting players in space and trying to activate speed. So those are just some off the cuff observations of what I've seen from his offense.
You and Andy on a first name basis already, huh?
I told
it's
you.
Scary. It's scary. I've been looking at it all week, just dreading to have to say it quickly. We'll get into that at some point, but that's not an easy one to approach. And I think that the way that you look at these a lot of times, and fans are not always right, but you look at the way that the fan base where the coach is leaving reacts to him leaving, and I don't think Kansas fans are particularly pleased with him having to depart here. So I think that if you're a Penn State fan, that's probably a good sign.
More information, more conversation over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Sean Fitz, senior insider and publisher for Blue White Illustrated. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for explaining all the breaking news for all of the fans here.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Thanks for checking us out. Also shout out Nate Bauer, who was on this one a week ago as Penn State's top target. Koltinicki, not Nate. But no, it was a fun ride, and hopefully we don't have another one.
Yeah, that'll be, but if it happens, we'll be here talking about it on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Any breaking news, any portal targets, anything like that, lock yourself in, because it's all coming. The floodgates are about to open, and we'll be here to ride the wave. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. He's Sean Fitz. We'll talk to you when that happens.